the global adventure of Mr. Wanderlust and his unlikely guide. So there was this guy, let's call him Mr. Wanderlust, who had very ambitious travel plans. He decided he would visit every single country in the world, one by one, in a way that was efficient, i.e., he wasn't going to fly or take the usual travel routes. Oh no, he was going to do it by walking, and perhaps taking a few taxis when the walking got real intense. His journey began in Algeria, where he immediately realized that traveling by foot through deserts is a little trickier than he'd expected. Mr. Wanderlust was convinced he'd be fine because he'd read somewhere that camels are easy to find. Turns out, not all deserts come with free camel rentals. From there, he made his way to Argentina, where he learned that the tango wasn't just a dance, it was everywhere. Imagine walking into a random cafe only to be invited to participate in an impromptu tango off. Mr. Wanderlust may not have been coordinated, but he could sure fake it with the best of them. The locals were impressed, though not sure if he was dancing or having a fit. Austria was next. He found himself on top of the Alps, where he got a little too caught up in the idea of yodeling. Spoiler alert, yodeling sounds much better from below the mountain. Even the cows were rolling their eyes at him. When he arrived in Bangladesh, he was all set for some sightseeing when he realized that every time he tried to ask for directions, he'd end up getting into long conversations about cricket. Apparently, Mr. Wanderlust was now an unofficial member of the national cricket team, at least in the eyes of every local he met. In Belgium, he learned about the art of fine chocolate and beer, and the fine art of overeating. The combination of beer and chocolate led to some very interesting moments, like him accidentally entering a beer tasting competition and then eating his weight in truffles, all while speaking fluent nonsense. In Belize, he thought it would be a peaceful beach getaway, but then a friendly local insisted he try to learn how to play the steel drums. 5 hours later, Mr. Wanderlust could barely play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but he did manage to make friends with an entire beach volleyball team. Apparently, no one can resist a guy with bad rhythm. By the time he reached Bolivia, Mr. Wanderlust thought he was at the top of his game until he tried to hike the salt flats and realized that after a certain point, the entire landscape starts looking like a giant reflective mirror. His reflection, however, kept giving him sass, making him question his life choices. Brazil was, of course, all about the carnival. But after spending 10 minutes on a float, he learned that samba requires an actual rhythm, not just flailing your limbs in a vague attempt to make it look like you're dancing. In Bulgaria, Mr. Wanderlust ended up in a village where everyone spoke in riddles. Every time he asked for directions, he got a cryptic answer involving goats, hay, and something about a mystical forest. He still has no idea what they were trying to say. Next, he hit Cambodia, where he nearly joined an archaeological dig in Angkor Wat, thinking he could help find hidden treasure. Instead, he spent the day trying to convince a group of tourists that he was the lost prince of Cambodia. They were unconvinced, mostly because he had no crown and kept tripping over tree roots. When he reached Canada, Mr. Wanderlust thought he'd find the stereotypical nice Canadians, but they just kept offering him maple syrup. After 5 liters of syrup, he was no longer sure whether he was in a dream or in a sticky situation. Chile was next, and he tried to make a living as a llama tour guide, which would have gone well if llamas didn't have such strong opinions about who they chose to carry their packs. Spoiler alert, they didn't like Mr. Wanderlust. He eventually reached Colombia, where he tried to learn salsa, which turned into an epic series of missteps, spins, and one embarrassing fall into a fountain. Locals told him he'd get it next time, but Mr. Wanderlust figured the fountain was probably a good place for a break. In Costa Rica, Mr. Wanderlust tried to do yoga in the jungle, but the monkeys had other plans, treating his downward dog pose like a new game of how quickly can we steal your lunch. By the time he got to Croatia, Cyprus, and Czech Republic, he was starting to get into the groove of the whole travel the world thing, until he tried to navigate a Croatian castle's staircases, which turned out to be more confusing than his entire high school math class. And the list goes on. Mr. Wanderlust tried to learn Greek in Greece, got stuck in a cafe in Guatemala because someone actually thought he was famous, and spent an hour in Honduras trying to explain to locals that he wasn't there to start a new restaurant, even though he kept looking at the menu. He learned that in Hong Kong, time moves differently. People in Hungary taught him how to make paprika, and in India, he discovered that eating too much curry could be a real adventure, if you catch my drift. But after visiting Iraq, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Jordan, and Laos, Mr. Wanderlust had learned one thing for sure. Every country had something unique, whether it was culture, food, or friendly locals who tried to convince him to stay. Of course, that didn't stop him from tripping over his own feet in Latvia, only to get up and have a chat about vodka in Lithuania. He reached Luxembourg and thought he was at the end of his journey, only to realize that the next stop on the list was Malaysia, and it was time to eat his weight in laksa. At the end of it all, Mr. Wanderlust didn't just see the world, he stumbled through it. But the one thing he never forgot? You don't need a perfect plan to make the journey unforgettable, just a good pair of shoes and a sense of humor. Hope that gave you a laugh?